Price, Chair. Honored to be joined by Paul Krikorian, Vice Chair, Nuri Martinez, and Paul Koretz. We'll be joined by other members soon. But we've got two agendas. We have a regular agenda and a special agenda. On the regular agenda, members, without any objection, we're going to move items 1, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, and 10 on consent. No objections. That will be the order. 7, 8, 9, and 10. Which takes us to item 2. Mr. Clerk.
Item number 2 is a CAO report relative to authorization for the Los Angeles Department of Convention and Tourism Department to execute a professional services agreement with the Los Angeles Tourism and Convention Board for a 5.5-year term beginning January 1st, 2015 through June 30th, 2020 for the LATCB to provide marketing and tourism services and sales and booking services for the Los Angeles Convention Center.
Okay, I see the board is here with us. Tourism, you may proceed.
Good afternoon. Marla Blevins, Assistant General Manager with the Convention and Tourism Development Department. The contract that is before you is an agreement between the city and LA Tourism to provide marketing services for the city as well as the convention center. The current contract expires on December 31st of this year. The overall goal of the contract is to grow the local economy by promoting the city as a tourist and convention site. There are 4 primary objectives around the contract, which include increasing visitation to the city of LA as both a tourist and convention site, measuring the economic impact of tourism to the city, facilitating and tracking visitor engagement, and making sure that we use the city's funding to the best of its ability. Funding for this contract comes from the 1% percentage point of the 14% transient occupancy tax. And staff is recommending that the term of this contract be 5.5 years. This item was in TCT committee earlier this morning. The chair of that committee recommended a 10.5-year term, which is different from what staff is recommending. We are available to answer any questions that you may have about this item. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm inclined to stick with the committee recommendation of 5 years, but any questions, members, on this particular issue?
One quick question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Fisher.
I agree with your support of staff's recommendation as to the term. The question I had was, recently the LA 2020 Commission had some recommendations regarding collaborative marketing between Los Angeles and surrounding governmental entities with regard to tourism with the county and with Santa Monica and so on. Can you speak to whether we're taking steps to move in that direction? Because of the many recommendations in that report, that seemed to be one that was widely accepted as a really good idea that would produce a lot of dividends for all of Southern California.
I do believe that LA Tourism does work and collaborate with other CVBs in the area, Beverly Hills, Santa Monica. I'd like to call up Patty McGinnis. I think she can provide more detail on that, but that is part of the overall strategy. When people do come to the city for conventions, a lot of times, obviously we want them to stay in LA and increase our TOT, but a lot of times they end up staying in Santa Monica or Beverly Hills, so there are collaborative efforts with other convention and visitors bureaus in the area.
Hi, good afternoon. Just to add to what Marla was saying, we as Convention and Visitors Bureaus, destination marketing organizations, do work with Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, Pasadena, even Marina del Rey, West Hollywood. And we are meeting now on a regular basis. We have done a number of programs with them in the past, particularly as it relates to the international markets. We are also working with the LA Chamber. We've had some discussions too in terms of how do we broaden that whole regional tourism effort so that it's beyond just destination marketing organizations. Interestingly, yesterday we were at a meeting of the Western or the West Side Center of Governments, and they were also having the same conversation about the regional, how do we work together to really expand our efforts in regional tourism. So the conversation is definitely gaining ground. There are a lot of groups that seem to be having that conversation. So one of our tactics is, could we all join in on the same conversation? So answer to your question, there is movement quite a bit in that regard.
Very good. Thank you.
Question for the CAO. Is this arrangement going to save us any money? Is this arrangement going to save the city any money?
Is the contract arrangement
Yes.
going to save the
Yeah.
city any money? Well, the purpose of the contract is to encourage tourism and to encourage outsiders to visit the city, to spend money in the city, and to also obtain services to support bringing citywide conventions to the city. So the goal is to generate money for the city. It's a fixed 1% TOT, as it has been for the past at least 10 plus years that we've had the contract with LATCB. So that percentage is not going to change,
How
but
much
the
do we-
focus is more revenue.
How much revenue do we anticipate it's generating?
Well, the information that I have with me is the amount of TOT for 13-14 that the city anticipates to spend towards this contract is about $14 million. We see that TOT will hopefully be increasing over the years, and we'd have to report back with more specific information on economic impact. Unless you know.
Well, we know what an important role
I
the
think I don't have-
tourism and, I'm sorry, did you have an answer?
Oh, I'm not sure. I have an approximate answer
Okay.
that might want to say that I think last year about the total amount of TOT generated funds was around $180 million, and that obviously comes off the hotel visitor stays. And it's the third year of record-breaking occupancies as well as visitation. So it's a pretty good return on investment. Not that we can take full credit for it, but we do think we are
Well,
certainly
you should take
influencing.
some credit, but it has been a
We'd
team
like to-
effort.
We do think we're influencing.
It's been
yes.
a collaborative effort.
Yes, very much so.
Between the Tourism and Convention Board, and we know that you're working hard here and abroad to make that happen. Any other questions? Okay, we'll approve the CAO's recommendations without objection, and that will be the order. Thank you. Item 3, Mr. Clerk.
Item number 3 is a joint report from the Workforce Investment Board and the Economic and Workforce Development Department relative to authorization to accept and expend up to $6 million from the U.S. Department of Labor Employment and Training Administration and Workforce Innovation Funds to provide training and reemployment services to job seekers experiencing homelessness, including formerly incarcerated individuals and disconnected youth.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Shafi Amir from the CAO's office. There is no CAO report on this item, but revised recommendations have been prepared for you, which hopefully you've had a chance to see. They're simply removing the request for the new position that's associated with this grant acceptance. EWDD has a need to get this expedited as soon as possible, the acceptance of the grant, and the request for the new position that was in their original transmittal would have slowed things down a bit. So what will happen is that request will be included in their 15-16 budget process, the request for the new position, but the revised recommendations are having everything else in them, which is the acceptance and the approval by the council. If you have any questions, we can answer questions about that or about the grant itself.
Have we identified the organizations that are going to be working on this grant?
I'm sorry?
Have we identified the organizations that will be recipients of this grant?
Good Good afternoon, Councilman. Robert Science, Assistant General Manager of Economic and Workforce Development. We're very happy to actually receive this $6 million award. It was one of 11 from the Department of Labor for Workforce Innovation Fund grant. I'm here actually with our partner, with REDF, Vivian Lee, who can say a few words. But what we're attempting to do is marry social enterprise activity with our traditional homeless service providers and our workforce development providers. So we do have several organizations that are identified as a part of this grant. On the workforce side, we have Goodwill and CRCD, which is our new Workforce Center at Trade Tech. And we have two youth organizations, AYE and UCLA is going to be a part of on our workforce side. And on our social enterprise side, I'll let Vivian talk.
Good afternoon. Hi,
Welcome.
everyone. Vivian Lee. I'm the Regional Director at REDF, and we're very happy to be a partner in this initiative. And so we have a background in really helping social enterprises, and these are nonprofits who are actually creating businesses that are competing in the market with products and services, but have a very specific mission of hiring those with barriers. And so we have been working with quite a few social enterprises here in Los Angeles, and so we are building on that. And some of the partners that are going to be part of this initiative include CRCD, Coalition for Responsible Community Development, Chrysalis, Weingart, Goodwill, LA Conservation Corps, Homeboy Industries, Downtown Women's Center. I think that's it. So thank you.
Well, this is an exciting opportunity to leverage these funds in ways that they really haven't in the Los Angeles area before. Is this an annual an allocation? What's the time period on this?
No, this was a national competition with the Department of Labor. So there was approximately 300 applications. They awarded 11. Los Angeles was fortunate to receive one of the 11 grants, and we're the only entity in the country that has received 2 of these grants. We'll try, if they have a third round of competition, we'll try to be the only one with 3.
How much did we receive in the previous round?
The previous round was $12 million that we did on our out-of-school youth initiative. And we also, with that, it comes with a national evaluation and a local evaluation. So we're going to have some really good data on that particular grant, as well as this strategy that we want to replicate and actually take to other parts of the city that have high homeless.
Well, because this is such a pioneering grant, I certainly think the committee would like to be kept abreast of developments as it moves forward, perhaps on a quarterly basis. Just give us an update on how this is moving forward. Because I do think that in the future we'll see more social action funding along these kinds of lines, and I think this is a great way to start. Any other questions? Mr. Krikorian and Mr. Dio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree completely with your request for regular reports. That would be very helpful to have so that we can see what expenditures are working best and what we can support more. I'm always happy to receive $6 million in new money for such an important function as this. That's great. The one question I have, because this was just distributed with the new recommendations, I'm trying to correlate the $4.9 million that's to be appropriated to WIF LA Rise with the $3.1 million in paragraph 5. What's the significance of the $3.1 million in the 5th recommendation? Is that I assume that's a subset of the 4.9, but I'm not sure what that's for.
Yeah, those would be specific to the contractors themselves. So LA Rise, in addition to the contractors that Ms. Lee spoke about, they will be receiving direct contracts.
Okay, so 3.1 of the 4.9
will be directly
is
contracted.
directly appropriated to those contractors, and then the balance remains for future appropriation.
Right. We have departmental costs as well as the rest of the budget.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, we'll revisit it when we get our quarterly reports back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Cedillo.
Mr. Krikorian, this is something that might interest both of us. I'm happy to receive $6 million on any given day. I come from Borough Heights, and that's a lot of money. And I'm happy, it seems that you've thought about how we're going to use it. But it seems, I have two concerns. One, obviously, is always that we utilize the money in the most needy areas. It sounds like you're headed in that direction. But the other concern I have, Mr. Krikorian, is we're going to be looking at some cuts on our con plan and some cuts that are coming up. And it just seems that it would make sense for us that on one hand we're excited to get new money, on the other hand we're going to be telling people later on that we're cutting them, who provide services that are same or similar to what we're going to be funding. And so it should seem that we might want to figure a way to marry these two together. Money is money, it's all fungible, so if there's money coming in, is there some way we can look at the agencies that provide services that we're going to tell them we're going to cut, and they're going to look at them and say, well, why are you cutting us, and then starting new programs that we don't have a track record or an experience on? And we have another group of people who do have a track record, do have an experience, are providing services, and they all seem to be moving towards the same goal. And so I know we have very limited resources, but it would seem that we might want to figure out a way to marry those two, integrate those two, so that we could avoid painful cuts in the spring, while at the same time launching new programs that will have, at this point, a short-term impact, because we don't know that we can count on future funding. So that's my question for you guys.
So I don't have an exact knowledge of what cuts that will be forthcoming in the CDBG, but I do have a general perspective. So many of the agencies that we do have in this particular grant are agencies that have been funded through CDBG, like the Conservation Corps, Chrysalis, and a few others. The one point of correction, though, is that these dollars are not fungible. This was a direct competition with the Department of Labor that had a very specific purpose and had a methodology connected to it. So it just that we are obligated back to our funding source to do this.
And I wouldn't suggest that you not meet the purpose, but I know that we have these things. What I'm asking more for is your innovation, your innovative thinking, and your leadership to figure out how those things can be intersected. I know that the grants have a specific purpose and reason, and wouldn't suggest that we don't do that, but I'm trying to figure out, is there a way that we can do that that also helps us address cuts? As you indicated, we're going to be sending one letter to say, good news and bad news, right? So we just cut you, and then now we just are going to award you this new grant, and so we want to look for ways to reconcile that, make those agencies aware, and look to see if there's other agencies that might also fall within the realm of the specific grant.
If I can add one aspect to it, I think one unique point of this initiative is that we're really actually building on what all these organizations already do. And so it really isn't something, that is completely out of left field. It is working and leveraging the core and what they do well. And the difference is that we're integrating it with existing other systems. And so how do we make it more comprehensive and that it's more sustainable in the long run by leveraging dollars that a lot of these groups haven't been able to utilize?
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. In fact, I think all of us would agree that all these agencies were in a new era, and that we're looking for ways that people can leverage and create their own sustainability, because we are in a new time period. Thank you.
I think the council makes a great point. We don't want these funds to supplant or be an excuse for not allocating funds. I mean, we want the pot to grow, not that this is going to be a substitute or replacement funds. We want the creativity to continue to continue flowing and to build upon as this project is proposing to do. And I think it'll be an exciting model, not just here in Los Angeles, but throughout the state and nationwide, because this is really kind of the cutting edge. And I'm pleased that Los Angeles will be a part of this experiment. Well, members, if there's no objection, we're going to approve the report as amended by the CAO, and we look forward to the first quarterly report of this program's success. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item 6. Mr. Clerk, please read the...
Item number 6 is a motion Buscaino, Forcedillo, Corretz, Bonin relative to a request to the city attorney to add language to any citywide minimum wage ordinance that addresses wage theft, including penalties, fines, and other enforcement tools the city attorney deems appropriate, and an instruction for the CLA with the assistance of the CAO to report on the feasibility of establishing an Office of Labor Standards to enforce local wage ordinances.
Okay, we're going to take some public testimony on this matter that many of you are here to participate in, and we appreciate your presence and your participation. Because there are so many, we're going to ask that you limit your comments to 1 minute and be prepared to just identify yourself and to make your point. We'll have up Rusty Hicks, Marcel Woodman, Marino Hernandez, Axel Paredes, and Alfred Kepi.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, council members. My name is Rusty Hicks. I'm the executive secretary-elect of the LA.
Let's keep the congratulatory hand applause to a minimum, please. We want to.
I handed out $5 bills as I walked down,
yes, it was very effective.
down the aisle.
Very effective.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today on a really important issue. I think we all know that LA is the poverty capital of the country. I know that doesn't make all of you proud. That doesn't make all of us proud. And you have the opportunity to address that by not only raising the wage in the city, ensuring that you don't have to choose between going to work or being sick, that you can go home and get well. But you also have the opportunity to put in place solid wage enforcement provisions that will ensure that workers get what they deserve. And so I would leave you with 3 points. A policy should include the ability to collect what should be yours, the ability to be protected if in fact you report an employer who is cheating you out of your wage, and to enforce the minimum wage as it stands. So we look forward to working with you to get the strongest possible comprehensive policy in the city of LA. Thank you.
Thank you. Please keep the applause to a minimum. Marcel Woodman.
My name is Marcel Woodman. I'm 21 years old. I'm currently in training with Local 250 to get into the construction industry, and I'm a member of the Black Worker Center. I applied for jobs at the mall. I applied for grocery jobs, a lot of stuff. I probably applied for dozens of jobs, and I was turned down for each one. But I really want to work, so I didn't give up. I kept trying. Each time I didn't get the job was more discouraging than the last. But I kept going, I kept applying, and I kept getting turned down. I thought it was maybe happening to a few of us. I didn't have any reason to think it might be bigger than that. But then I went out with the Black Worker Center's monitoring teams to observe the construction sites on the expo line, and I saw no black people at all on the construction sites. When I didn't see anyone who looked like me out there, it was really hard to picture myself getting a job. I got discouraged. It feels like no matter what I do, no matter how much I apply, no matter how much I learn new skills and network with people, I won't get the job anyway because I'm black. So I support raising the minimum wage, and I support punishing employers for wage theft. Those are all good. But the biggest kind of wage theft there is when people are locked out of jobs completely because of their race. I hope the City Council will pass laws lifting up workers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Mariano Hernández, soy jornalero de Labor Center Carece. Me robaron el salario por un mes enterito, yo no recibí mi salario, y cuando fui al Labor Commission no me ayudaron, así es de que necesitamos...
Are you going to translate? Okay.
He said, hi, good afternoon, my name is Mariano Hernandez, and I'm a day laborer, and I'm part of the Carecen Day Labor Center. I was robbed from my wages for a month, and I went to the Labor Commission, and they did nothing for me.
Así es de que estamos pidiendo por esta ordenanza. Se supone que este es un país que de tradición protegen al desprotegido. Así es de que pedimos que por favor pongan esa ordenanza para que nuestro salario sea protegido por esta ley, porque si no van a seguir los robos de salario.
Supposedly we live in a city with just laws, but it's doing quite the opposite. It's really important that we pass this ordinance against wage theft so that folks can recover their wages.
Así es de que suplicamos a los que están en el poder de podernos ayudar que le pongan atención a tanto robo de salario, y si viene el aumento del salario, va a ser más incrementado el robo de salarios.
So it's important that council passes an ordinance to stop wage theft so that we can help recover our wages, and also too, if the minimum wages increase, and so will wage theft increase as well.
Por esa razón es de que necesitamos esta ordenanza para protegernos y proteger a nuestras familias que tengan el sustento diariamente.
So that's why we ask for council to pass this wage theft law. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for your comments.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Axel Paredes y pertenezco a la coalición Chirla.
Hi, my name is Axel Paredes and I represent the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles, CHIRLA.
Trabajé en una gasolinera desde las 7 de la mañana hasta las 5 de la tarde. Me robaban 2 horas y media diarias por 6 días de trabajo.
I worked in a gas station for 6 days a week. I worked from 7 to 5 and they would rob 2.5 hours a day of work.
No me daban break y no me daban lunch.
They wouldn't give me a break and they wouldn't give me lunch.
Nuestro objetivo específico, le venimos a decir a la ciudad que tiene que pasar la ordenancia del robo de salario.
Our objective today and our ask is asking the City Council to pass an ordinance against wage theft.
Queremos decirle que las personas que venimos somos seres humanos emigrantes a trabajar a la ciudad de Los Ángeles.
We're here today to tell you that immigrants are human beings and we're here to work.
Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you. My name is Jacqueline Mejia. I'm the local policy advocate for CHIRLA. CHIRLA is in strong support of an effort to increase the minimum wage of the city of Los Angeles. Increasing the minimum wage is a huge step and must be complemented with a strong mechanism to enforce current labor laws, specifically the ability for workers to collect unpaid wages for the unscrupulous employers. So CHIRLA urges the city to adopt policies to prevent and penalize wage theft for the city of Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you. Alfred Peckby.
Good afternoon, Councilman. My name is Alfred Pepe. I'm a member of ACE. I work as a caregiver for in-home house support, and I'm here to talk about paid sick days. We were not offered on the job a paid sick days, so it's not fair for us to choose between going to work sick or trying to get paid for that day. So we hear that there's a motion going on here for the council members to support a paid sick days on the job. So that's why I'm here, to just support them, that they should go on, and more grease to their elbow. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Okay, next up, Aya Ujin, Edgar Gonzalez, Alfredo Reyes, Rosemarie Molina, Rebecca Ronquillo.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Aiha Nguyen with the Shopwell Lake Coalition in Lane. I'm here to speak in support of paid sick days being a component of the minimum wage discussion. Lack of paid sick days hurts the health of workers, consumers, families, and the public. As we've heard, workers who don't have paid sick days have a difficult choice to make. Employers are shifting the cost to employees and the public when they don't provide paid sick days, often at a very high cost. It costs taxpayers 5 times more to treat a flu outbreak than to provide working people with paid sick days. A recent bill that passed the state, while takes steps in the right direction, is not enough. I'd like to thank Mayor Eric Garcetti for his leadership on this issue, and I hope that the City Council here will follow in the footsteps of other cities which have successfully adopted minimum wage ordinances with paid sick leave and wage theft. Paid sick leave is a common sense solution to protecting worker and public health and lifting us all out of poverty. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Edgar Gonzalez. I'm a McDonald's worker and I make $9 an hour. One of the workers that went on strike last week, we need $15 an hour now because I need to provide diapers for my daughter, pay rent, buy food, and pay bills. And with this low wages, it's really hard for me to afford everything. When I'm a father, when my daughter was born, I couldn't afford to stay with my daughter after she was born because I can't afford to live and not get paid sick days. Also, we don't get paid the hours that we work. We don't get paid overtime, and they don't pay us our breaks, and every penny counts. That's why we're here today, asking that you consider $15 an hour now, pay sick days, and an end to wage theft. Thank you.
Thank you.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Alfredo González, soy un chofer profesional que vivo aquí en California. Pues vengo en representación de todos los más de 10,000 choferes profesionales que sufrimos en silencio.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Alfredo Gonzalez, and I'm a professional chauffeur, and I'm here to represent all the other chauffeurs in the city of Los Angeles.
Que día a día nosotros como choferes profesionales sacamos cargas en los puertos en diferentes destinos. El apoyo que vengo a darle a mis compañeros de diferentes trabajos, factorías y todos los trabajos que ellos tienen.
So I'm here not only to represent the chauffeurs, but a lot of other industries as well.
Yo sé que en todas las compañías, grandes corporaciones como en la que yo pertenezco, Pacer, Carthage, hay abuso de muchas cosas. Tengo pruebas aquí en la mano que me gustaría que lo vieran.
So I actually brought here an invoice of the wage theft that I have suffered, just as in many other corporations do as well. He has an invoice if somebody wants to take this.
Yo sé que el corto tiempo que tengo para expresar toda la necesidad que tengo, el robo de salario, la mala clasificación, en lugar de que yo me lleve dinero a mi familia, tengo el recibo aquí en la mano de que no me llevo nada, le debo a la compañía.
So he just wants to quickly express that all the wage theft that he suffers, he doesn't have enough time to explain it all, but he does have an invoice that shows his wage theft for you guys to look at.
Yo sé que el tiempo ya se me acabó, pero hago referencia de que nosotros como choferes profesionales, en lugar de ganar el sueldo mínimo, no lo ganamos. Por eso es que estoy aquí para que ahora sí que tomen un poco de consideración a las grandes peticiones y en apoyo a mis compañeros que trabajan en diferentes compañías y trabajos, costuras y todo por el estilo, que se implemente el sueldo mínimo para ellos.
So he says that he doesn't win minimum wage, and that invoice is proof of that because he gets wages stolen all the time, and it's not just a representation of him, but his colleagues as well.
Y gracias por la atención y gracias a los Teamsters que me apoyan para venir con ustedes a expresar todo este gran problema, robo de salarios que hay.
Thank you for your time, and thank you to the Teamsters for their support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rosemary Molina. I'd like to defer my time to Julia Figueroa McDonough.
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Rebecca Ronquillo, and I'm with the Coalition Against Wage Theft, CUA, and I'm also giving my time
To Julia, and Julia's right here next, if we can give her our minute.
Okay, Julia, you've got the minute.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. My name is Julia Figueroa McDonough. I'm an attorney with the California Division of Labor Standards Enforcement, more commonly known as the DLSE or the Labor Commissioner's Office. The DLSE is the state agency responsible for enforcing California's wage and hour laws, and we are charged with ensuring minimum workplace standards in order to protect both employees and lawfully operating businesses. Since Labor Commissioner Julie Su took office in 2011, we have made fighting wage theft our #1 priority. We have assessed more in wages and penalties owed from scofflaw employers in the last few years than at any time in the division's history, with an over 400% increase in minimum wages assessed and an over 600% increase in overtime assessed. Despite these accomplishments, we cannot win the fight against wage theft in the underground economy alone. Our staffing levels are the lowest they have been in over a decade. We have fewer than 60 field deputies to cover the entire state, each one of them with an average of 150 cases open at any given time, and several hundred cases that are currently unassigned for lack of staff. Since 2011, our Public Works Unit alone has received over 7,500 complaints. In addition to field enforcement, we process approximately 30,000 new wage claims each year, seeking over $100 million in unpaid wages. Our LA office is our busiest by far, receiving over 5,000 wage claims in a year. We have implemented many creative strategies to do less with more and effectively combat wage theft despite our limited resources. Chief among them is our partnership with the City of San Francisco's Office of Labor Standards Enforcement. Our joint enforcement has resulted in increased citations against employers who flaunt the law and greater compliance with the highest of standards which have been set by that city's minimum wage ordinance. In a recent case we worked on together, we obtained a $4.25 million settlement with a San Francisco restaurant that was not paying the higher local minimum wage and was also depriving its workers of rest breaks, meal breaks, and taking their tips. It is important to note that although current law allows an individual worker to file a wage claim based upon a higher local minimum wage, we do not, as the DLSE, have the power to cite or issue any sort of citation based upon higher local minimum wage ordinances. This means that without an enforcement mechanism built in by the city, as there is in San Francisco, a higher local minimum wage will be significantly more difficult to enforce. Although San Francisco is at the forefront of progressive law enforcement when it comes to wage theft, LA is, unfortunately, the epicenter of violations.
If you could summarize.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's time we catch up. The Labor Commissioner is ready to offer all necessary support to implement this positive change for all the residents of LA, low-wage workers, lawful employers, and all who will benefit from a thriving local economy. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Alfredo Reyes, Ron Hassan, Paul Jung, Christina Bailey, Rick Floss. Ron, why don't you come up?
Good afternoon. My name is Ron Hassan, and I would like to start, first of all, by thanking Councilman Corret, Cedillo, and Price for your efforts in helping us to move this forward. It is important that as citizens here in Los Angeles that we have a diverse workforce. We know that currently 2% of construction workers are African Americans. Black lives matter. And seemingly, there does not seem to be the diversity mix that needs to occur. This Office of Labor Standards would help greatly in terms of improving that all citizens, which would include African Americans, become a greater part of the workforce that's in our city. We know that there's some $50 billion that's coming into Los Angeles. If we want to continue to have healthy communities, it is important that we include all of our citizens as a part of it. And this Labor Standards Board has some different features which we feel is important. We need your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, Councilman. My name is Christina Bailey. I am a small business owner. I own a cafe called Manifesto. Our cafe represents all of us here that wants to end wage theft. We need your support by making sure that by creating an ordinance that will end that. As a small business owner, it affects me and my valuable employers because the money that is taken away from them is taken away from me and everyone else that is living in this great city. So I urge you to support us, and together we can make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Paul Jung. I'm a staff attorney with Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA. We're the nation's largest legal and civil rights advocacy organization serving Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. I'm here today to support the inspiring work of the LA Coalition Against Wage Theft and LA Black Worker Center in advocating on behalf of workers' rights. Action to address wage theft is long overdue and must happen now. As an organization, we have long recognized a pervasive practice of wage theft in Los Angeles where 8 out of 10 workers experience wage theft. Wage theft is a crime and unscrupulous employers must be held accountable. In addition to wage theft ordinance, We also support a provision that protects equal employment opportunity rights of workers and the enforcement of anti-discrimination laws so that employers understand the effects of the systemic exploitation and exclusion of our workers of color. Thank you for your time, and we urge your vote in favor of the motion.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Rick Foss. I'm with the Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers Local 105. In partnership with Smart Local 105, I also am a partner with the Black Workers Center, an associate of CHIRLA, and every other organization in the House here today, and I stand in support of the Wage Theft Enforcement Bureau, the Office of Labor Standards Enforcement. I urge that the Council, you guys please pass this. You heard from people speaking, and I personally have helped people with the DLSE to retain some of the wages that have been stolen from them time and time again. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Alfredo Reyes, Lilia Garcia, Rabbi Klein, Dennis Stangley, and Carol Freeman.
Good afternoon. My name is Lilia Garcia. I represent the Maintenance Cooperation Trust Fund. We're a janitorial watchdog group. We are funded by 140 responsible contractors who created us to deal with the growth of unfair competition in the industry. So the other perspective of wage theft is the responsible employer who every day is losing their right to a fair marketplace. When we're looking at $1.4 billion annually in this city that is robbed, that's $1.4 billion of taxes that's not paid. That's $1.4 billion of workers' comp premiums that are not paid by those employers. So the unfair competition is great. And we're not just talking about anecdotal situations. We're talking about Los Angeles International Airport. The Labor Commission just cited Scientific Concepts, almost $1 million for not paying janitors. And what were they doing? Whenever there was a flight delay, they were requiring the janitors to clock out. Thank you very much. This also addresses responsible businesses.
Thank you.
That was great. My name is Rabbi Jonathan Klein with Clue, and you show me a faith leader who opposes a responsible living wage theft policy, and I'll show you a charlatan. There's no such thing as a faith leader who would oppose good practice such as this. The prophets rail against wage theft all over the place. Our tradition, my tradition of Judaism, teaches Dina de Malchuta Dina, which means the law of the land is the law. All we're asking for is the ability to enforce the law. And it says, do not steal, thou shalt not steal. And we want to understand it's not just stealing something in a store in the abstract, it's stealing sweat equity. It's people's lives that are being taken away from them for the sake of someone else's profits. It says, do not oppress the widow, orphan, or stranger 36 times. And we know, by the way, with sick day policy, that women are disproportionately affected by that, so we also stand with all our women friends along the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carol Freeman. What I want to do is pass on this because what I want to talk about is more of a public concern. So I will wait until that time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, David Hoffman, Cliff Smith, Kwasi Nkrumah, and Reverend William Smart, and Dr. Mallory Rhodes.
Good afternoon, Council. Cliff Smith, the business manager of the Roofers and Waterproofers Union, Local 36, covering 4 counties around Los Angeles area. We're here to support the workers and the organizations in this room representing the community to insist that a livable minimum wage be implemented in the city of Los Angeles, and also the enforcement apparatus to ensure that not only do we have a wage that people can support their families on paper, on the books, but we have some enforcement, some agencies, some power behind it to make sure that they're getting paid the wages that they work for and that they deserve. Thank you for your time.
My name is Kwasi Nkrumah. I am the co-chair of the Martin Luther King Coalition of Greater Los Angeles. And we all know that Dr. King died on April 4th, 1968 in the city of Memphis in the midst of a garbage strike which he was building support for. And this was one of many, many struggles that Dr. King took up while he was on the scene and able to do it. We have a lot of inequities going on in our world today, and what worse form of crime than to promise someone that you will pay them, someone who really needs a job and who expends their time and energy to build your enterprise, and then withhold the wages that you promised to give them in good faith. This is a crime. It needs to be treated as a crime. It needs to be corrected by the strongest measures possible by our city, and we urge you to support this measure. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Molly Rhodes. I'm a research analyst with SEIU 721 and a member of the Coalition of LA City Unions and Fix LA Coalition. Wanted to lend our voice in support of creating an enforcement bureau on the wage theft. As an organization that represents workers, we know enforcement is everything. Laws don't mean anything. Contracts don't mean anything if you don't have a right enforcement mechanism. Also, just as an organization that represents 22,000 LA city workers, half of whom live in the city of LA, we have a huge concern about the income inequality gap and race disparity in LA. During the budget crisis in LA, we've seen a 12.7% drop in African American employment in the city of Los Angeles itself. So, thank you.
Okay, last call, Reverend William Smart, Dennis Stanley, and Alfredo Reyes. All right. Well, we appreciate all the comments. Members, are there any comments or discussion? I believe Councilman Cedillo has an amendment or two. Councilman, are you prepared?
We have questions, I think, for the city attorney, right?
We could ask the city attorney to come forward, please.
I'm Valerie Flores, Senior Assistant City Attorney.
Valerie, thank you. We've enjoyed working with you on this. Can you tell us about some of the enforcement tools that we have now and that we can move forward with to make sure that we protect the minimum wage?
Yes. With the city's adoption of its own minimum wage, several new enforcement tools will become available to the city. The city will be able to form its own enforcement bureau. It can use a variety of tools. It can enforce penalties that are stiffer and larger than state law. It can tailor remedies to specific businesses. Passing minimum wage law will give the city a broad array of tools to combat and enforce wage theft.
So in fact, if we choose so, we could even increase, let's say, double the fines and double the penalties if we wanted to exceed what the state has as its current law?
Yes. In connection with the city's own minimum wage, the city can set whatever penalties it believes are appropriate, including penalties that are more severe and even double what current penalties are available under state law for state law violations.
What are some things we can do today that the city attorney, working with us upon our request, could we do to help enforce today's current minimum wage? This is
Right.
this is not a problem that's waiting for the higher minimum wage, but actually a problem that exists today.
Correct. As several members of the City Council, the City Attorney, Mike Fuhrer, is very active in the wage theft arena, and our office has been working closely with the State Labor Standards Enforcement Bureau to specifically ask the state to refer cases to our office for prosecution. The state is overwhelmed. Los Angeles does have a lot of case backlog, so the city's attorney's office has set up a dialogue with the state to increase current prosecutions of state law.
Okay. Can you tell us about some of the things we can do with respect to imposing liens on properties,
Right.
on current employers who are guilty of wage theft? And what are some of the other things we can do with respect to permitting business licenses, et cetera?
Right. With regard to liens, again, once the city establishes its own penalties, if an employer commits wage theft and these penalties are due and owing, the city could lawfully impose a lien against the employer to try to collect those penalties and fines. In terms of existing permits, we are researching what we can do under state law. We're in an arena where the state law occupies the field of labor standards. So again, we have the greatest leeway when we enact our own city law in terms of how we can enforce it. We are a bit constrained by state law when we are looking to enforce state law, and that's why we've tried to focus on the enforcement efforts through the city attorney's criminal branch. But we're happy to report back to you on any possible remedies.
We all look with great anticipation to the passing of our minimum wage. We appreciate the leadership of the mayor on this, and we look forward to moving this forward. But today, I mean, we're here, Mr. Koretz and I are here because this wage theft is an ongoing problem. It's a problem that's been going on for a while. It's one for which we look for relief today. Tell us some of the things that we can ask the city attorney to do for us today, not waiting for the new ordinance,
Right.
but today, under today's circumstance. What can we do working with the state? What can we do independently to enforce minimum wage in the city of Los Angeles today?
Again, our office has focused our efforts on criminally going after employers who have already been found liable or been convicted of wage theft. And we're going to continue to work with the state to get more case referrals. And we will be happy to look at what we can do before we pass our own minimum wage. But we are very happy to hear that the city is on the verge of considering a new citywide minimum wage because, again, that will give the city the broadest possible enforcement tools, and we could quickly, in connection with a minimum wage ordinance, add in a wage theft component that would, again, increase penalties over state law and add a lien provision and put a lot of teeth into our own city minimum wage law.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's great, something for us to look forward to. But I really want us to do something today. I want us to look at the employers who are liable or convicted of wage theft. I want us to find a way that we can, stop them from being employers, if that's an appropriate response, whether or not we can take their permits away from them. We want to do something today. The violations are occurring today. The violations aren't waiting for us to establish a new higher minimum wage, but those violations are today. $26 million a week, 1 point something billion dollars a year. This is an incredible loss that we cannot wait, and so we want to move forward today. And so we'd like the city attorney to report to us on them what actions they can take today to remove permits, to have enforcement of the state law today. We have a law today that requires that everybody who toils and who works gets a minimum of $9 per hour. That is not taking place. We recognize that the state is overwhelmed, and we appreciate their hard work, but the state is here in support of what we're doing, and we want to collaborate with them, but we want us to exercise our police powers of the city attorney to the fullest extent of the law and to pursue these employers who are not paying these employees today. And so we want you to report back to us what you're going to be able to do to help these workers today and move forward from there.
Happy to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Price. You know, I remember growing up when my mom used to be a seamstress, and they used to pay her by the unit, which is now illegal. And I remember my dad cleaning office buildings after he got off from his first job. And so I served as an interpreter a lot of times to try to get my mom's wages back, especially for the units that she wasn't paid for. So it's unbelievable. I'm 41 years old and we're still dealing with this issue. But the figures that I read are unbelievable. 655,000 low-wage workers in LA County alone, and something like they lose more than $26.2 million a week in lost wages. One of the questions I had, and I think you sort of answered it, but I'm still at a loss with, since the state has jurisdiction over wage theft, is there a loophole in state law that prevents them from actually going after and enforcing their own laws that we need to close? Or is it just a frustration in Sacramento with the state legislature that...
I've spent the last year sort of working with the state labor standards personnel, and I think it's a resource issue. I think the state has good intentions, but they are simply overwhelmed, and so I don't think it's for lack of trying. I don't know that there's a state law fix that's needed. I just think it's a resource issue, and there again, if we had our own bureau, we could partially fund it through fines, and we could, add a second avenue for enforcing many of the wage theft violations that occur, and many of them are in the city of Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm. So we shouldn't spend any more energy trying to deal with the legislature or getting the governor to address this issue. They just need to put more, they need more people power to enforce their own laws.
Right. No matter what state law fixes they would do, if they don't give the state enough resources, there will be employees who aren't paid what they're owed and can't enforce it. I mean, there may be some creative, some additional tools they can use, and we'd be happy when we're working on our own ordinance to work with the state and explore those as well.
So if wage theft is included in our minimum wage ordinance moving forward, it does give the city jurisdiction to enforce our own laws?
Correct.
And on the enforcement piece, because I often get very frustrated with creating laws that then the city doesn't even enforce. And on the enforcement piece, would there be a department that would be created to go after violators, and what would happen to the fines collected after they've been fined?
Right. There would be 4 possible ways to enforce a city minimum wage. One would be to simply allow the state to do it. Another way would be to form a new city department that would enforce the city's minimum wage. Another mechanism would be to form a division within an existing department to handle enforcement of citywide minimum wage laws. And a fourth potential option would be to contract out with a third-party administrator to either handle some or all of the enforcement. As a matter of fact, the state has recently begun to do that because one of the issues that employees were facing was even after they'd get a conviction or an employer was found liable for wage theft, the employee would get a piece of paper saying, yes, you're right, your employer cheated you out of wages, but it was very difficult to monetize that piece of paper. And so now the state has contracted with a third-party administrator to help the employees actually take that piece of paper and turn it into money. And so the city could look at something like that in terms of making sure that once employees have done all the hard work of proving a wage theft, that they'll actually be able to collect the money.
And what are some of the penalties for the violators? I mean, there are some violators that are repeated violators that won't pay the fine because they simply don't care. So what are some of our laws in place to go after such people?
Well, again, you can go after them criminally, currently under state law. The city could also do that if it had its own minimum wage. Plus, you could impose per-day penalties, fines. You could also put a lien against the employer's property if they are found liable or convicted of wage theft. So, again, you'd have increased tools at your disposal if you add a wage theft component to the minimum wage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was inspired by Ms. Martinez's recollections of her life, and it made me think about when I used to work in fast food and as a minimum wage employee, and it was very frequent that I worked until 2 or 3 in the morning and stopped getting paid at 11. And it's only on reflection now as an adult, when I think back a long time ago to those days, that I realized that my wages were being stolen from me. And I didn't even realize it at the time. So I think for a lot of our economy, a lot of our lowest paid employees, a culture can develop by which it becomes so commonplace that people don't even know that they have a right to object. They don't even know that they have a right to fight for what they're entitled to get paid. And we just can't permit an economy like that to continue to exist in this city. So I'm really looking forward to your reports back. As I understand it, Mr. Chairman, we're going to be hearing further options back here. As you do, I think, to Ms. Martinez's point about enforcement, it doesn't do us any good to just say we're going to do this and not actively enforce it. And that's going to take employees, it's going to take appropriations, it's going to include some kind of a regulatory regimen. And I know that, for example, in Seattle, when they set up their Office of Enforcement in Seattle, they appropriated $500,000 the first year, $600,000 or so, $1,000 the following year, and they have less than a third of our employment base. Right. So we're probably going to have to make a substantial appropriation in order to have any legitimate, kind of enforcement in this. So one thing that I'd like to hear back is, what are some of the models, and this is probably more a request for the CLA than for you, but a request for some other models of enforcement, the cost of that enforcement, the kind of personnel that we're going to have to bring on, and that may be something that we'll have to consider further in budget and finance, but I'd be very interested in hearing what those models are and how much we expect it's going to cost.
Yeah, all good points. We already have been working with the City of San Francisco. Their City Wage Enforcement Bureau does get some cost recovery from fines, so we're working with them to figure out how much of the fines go to San Francisco. Again, another benefit of having a city minimum wage with a wage enforcement component is the fines and penalties, in addition to what goes to the employee in terms of fines and back pay, you can impose additional penalties that would come to the city to help fund the Bureau. But you also raised another good point, which I wanted to address, and that is we could put in provisions in the wage theft ordinance that would increase penalties for retaliation. And that's an important
offenses. Repeat offenses as well.
And repeat offenses. And the other thing you mentioned, which is something to consider, is doing a publicity campaign to educate, once the law is in place, to educate workers and employers.
Right. And on that point, a lot of our employers are small businesses. They don't have the wherewithal of a big corporation to have a labor lawyer advise them on wage and hour laws and so forth. And so there's going to be well, first let me ask you this. When we talk about wage theft, and I wanted to ask Ms. Figueroa McDonough this when she was up, I'm wondering what the largest categories of types of wage theft are. Because I could see this term being defined as everything from, outright refusal to pay wages because somebody is, say, a tipped employee and so they don't get any wages, like car wash employees often are treated that way. Everything from that end of the spectrum to violations of break laws and so forth. A lot of times a smaller employer may be violating those provisions unknowingly. And so I think in order to prevent the employees from being hurt and to prevent the employer from being hurt and to prevent the kind of unfair competition against employers who are doing the right thing, we need to have an education component as well for businesses so that they know how to comply, so that we ensure compliance, because that's the objective. The objective should be to ensure compliance, not just to catch people, but to ensure that in fact they're complying with their obligations to their employees.
Right, and for businesses that inadvertently violate a wage law by, for example, thinking they don't have to pay for break time or what have you, they would be the employers who would make restitution immediately and quickly. It's the repeat offenders that are looking for ways to cheat the employees that, will probably, be subject to stiffer penalties and potentially liens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Kretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I've been working on this issue for 14 years. So I almost don't know where to start. But I'll start by saying Mr. Krikorian's comment about his own wage theft made me think back to my own family. My father died in the 1970s, but in the late 60s he worked for a restaurant that would take all the tips and then give a fraction of those tips back to the workers. So that's a little bit of wage theft in my family. I started working on this when I started in the state legislature. And I had a bill which almost passed, which I think there's still a need for at the state level, that I think would make this almost self-enforcing in one of its provisions. It was vetoed by Gray Davis, who I don't think fully understood the idea, and he sent it back with a veto message, come back with something that's a compromise somewhere in between. He was then recalled, so it never happened, and Arnold Schwarzenegger certainly wasn't interested in dealing with this issue. But unfortunately, even though there are many cases where the employee actually prevails and is owed the money and every appeal by the employer has happened, still less than 20% of those who are due the money, even at that point, ever receive the money. And the way to make this self-enforcing is to have a very significant penalty. So I think at the state it's still 10% if you haven't paid. My proposal was at a certain point it becomes 100% increase. So you owe $1,000, you hit this point, it doubles. You owe $2,000, you hit another point, it doubles again. At some point, it's too dangerous for even the worst scofflaws to take a chance and not pay their employees. And I think that is being talked about being included in our measure. I think it absolutely has to be. That will dramatically decrease the number of scofflaws that we actually have to take further steps to go after. And it will give us very substantial penalty money to deal with enforcement against the people that do. When I did this at the state level, I was surprised. There were business organizations coming to me saying, please enforce these laws. I'm not sure if it was the same group, but there was a janitorial group that came to us and said, the majority of people in our industry are cheating. We need help because we can't compete with the cheaters that are paying their employees $5 an hour, or whatever it was back then. It was a fraction of what they were supposed to be paid. So at the state level, it was more difficult because the state organizations like the State Chamber of Commerce took the side of the cheaters and lobbied against legislation to actually let people collect minimum wage, collect wages at all. I was surprised to find out that it's somewhat widespread as a practice that employers might pay their employees for a few weeks and then say, come and get us, just try to collect. And what does an employee do? So I think there's a lot they could do at the state level, but it's not happening. So I think, as in other places, we have to do this as an example and do it right. San Francisco, I think, is off to a good start. We had a measure that was introduced by Richard Alarcon in 2009, which I seconded. For whatever reason, never got through the process. Mr. Cedillo and I introduced another measure in June, which for some reason appears not to have been stamped for a committee. So right now it would appear to be in Never Never Land, so I don't think this committee can hear it until it gets stamped. And I don't know if that's the city clerk's or whose responsibility, but as part of this, I'd like to give direction that that item be heard as well. That item not being heard and no sense that it would be heard made this item necessary, that basically says you can't pass a minimum wage and just have that train roll by us without picking up wage theft. But it's also possible that that could be an extended dialogue. And I would rather see that we also have the ability to pass wage theft if that can happen first. So I don't know if that can be done as a feature of this motion, because it's more focused on making sure that we don't pass a minimum wage without it, or if we can find some way to come back and hear the other motion so we can move on these items quickly. Because
Well, we are going to be getting a report back, and so perhaps we can include that as well.
if we can include that as a possibility, because this has been happening for too many years and too many billions of dollars of wages have been taken from our lowest income workers, and we have to put an end to it. And every extra month that we wait is so many millions of dollars out of the pockets of the lowest income workers in the lowest poverty here in the city of Los Angeles.
Thank you, Councilman, for your comments. And I think it's clear. I think it's clear that as we move forward with this whole notion of the increase in the minimum wage and wage enforcement, we want to see what we can do now before that occurs. Mr. Cedillo.
Yes, I want to move forward with that a request and an instruction for recommended action. Before that, I want to thank the presence of some of my old colleagues, Loretta Stevens, and a very, very dear friend of mine, leader of my team when I was at SEIU Local 660, Patsy Howard. Please stand and let people appreciate your great leadership over all these years, both of you, Loretta Stevens. I have to tell you, we sure had some fun back in those days. Mostly I was sitting on that side with you, talking to people sitting on this side. But having said that, let's move off memory lane and go forward down Justice Road here. Let me ask that the city attorney to review and report back in 30 days on potential options for a city ordinance conditioning or revoking city permits for any employer found liable or convicted of wage theft under state law. So we want to do that now. And then I want to instruct the CLA and the CAO, in consultation, of course, with the city attorney, to report on creating a city labor standards enforcement unit in connection with the adoption of the city minimum wage under 3 different scenarios, to see whether or not we do this as a freestanding city department, do we do this as a division within a department, or do we look to a third-party administrator, maybe a nonprofit that sits in the audience with a keen and sharp focus on this, to work with the city as our partner on this. I'd like that also to be part of the report. And then let the record reflect that for at least 14 years, and in my time when I worked in labor, that Paul Koretz was always focused on figuring out how we could raise the boats, how to create the rising tide for those who were at the bottom of the wage scale, both in his leadership in the city of West Hollywood, his alliance with us, at SEIU and then during his tenure at the state legislature. We're very pleased to have his leadership here on this matter. It took some time, as did the driver's license, as did the DREAM Act, as do all things that are important and necessary. But the time has come and the time is now, and I applaud your leadership on this matter, Mr. Koretz. Let that be the order and the recommendation.
And I'd like to offer just a friendly amendment, Councilman, that we also include a discussion of equal opportunity, equal employment opportunity,
Yes.
which has been raised by several.
We should.
And we can make that a friendly amendment to the report back.
You know, the state has a great infrastructure, or bones of an infrastructure, but the state is challenged in terms of its enforcement, like all these government agencies, as we want more and want to pay less. But the city of Los Angeles is under a new direction, a new directive, and we should model the great infrastructure and goals and guidelines that the state sets up so that we do have a robust enforcement entity that protects workers regardless.
Mr. Koretz.
Thank you.
You have a final thought?
I'd just like to ask if we can call out the ability to substantially increase penalties as part of this process, because I think that's the key difference that will make this work.
Okay. I'd like to thank Council Members Cedillo and Koretz for bringing this important issue up. Across the country, we're hearing legislators, advocates, and community members calling out for equitable wages that can help hard-working men and women survive in today's economy. Cities like Seattle and San Francisco, Chicago, even Louisville, have passed or are considering efforts to raise the minimum wage for their residents. And of course, earlier this year, Los Angeles joined that movement in our effort to make this a more livable city for all. I'm incredibly proud to be one of the legislators with my colleagues pushing that agenda forward. But let's understand that if we raise wages without ensuring that those wages are being enforced, then we have failed to create the desired impact. We not only need to make sure that people are making a decent wage, but they're actually receiving what they've worked so hard to earn. What's more disturbing to me is that it's usually those most in need of a paycheck who fall prey to this terrible crime, and they happen to be disproportionately minorities. It's very important that we include equal employment opportunity component to all wage issues that we're discussing on wage theft. We are a majority city, and ensuring that people of color have equal access to a living wage ensures our city's financial future. As policymakers, we have to ultimately make the choice based on our principles and belief as to what's right for our city and the hard-working families that we represent. So I look forward to continuing this discussion as we finalize our citywide minimum wage ordinance. And members, without objection, we will we're going to approve the recommendations, the amendments as presented for 60 days to report back to this committee. 30 days? All right, let's make it 30 days. Report back to this committee so that we can continue this discussion to firm up and finalize a policy that we can all be proud of that will benefit the citizens and the workers in our community. Okay, without objection, that will be the order. All right. Okay. All right, members, we're going to move to the special agenda. Items 1 through 4, Mr. Clerk.
Item number 1 is a CLA report relative to a hotel development incentive agreement between the City of Los Angeles and Greenland LA Metropolis Hotel Development for the development of the Metropolis Hotel project.
Okay, without objection, we're going to move those items on consent. And we will move now to, items 1 through 4 on consent. And we'll move now to general comment, if there are any. And I think we've got a couple of cards here. Carol Freeman, David Hoffman and Brian Brojas. Please, some order as you depart. We've got other speakers waiting to speak.
Oh, that's all right. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Carol Freeman with the LaRouche Political Action Committee. And I wanted to tell you that I'm quite sure you are aware that there is an organization, a world organization of development, infrastructure, and political organizing called Brics. And Brics is founded by 5 nations: B for Brazil, R for Russia, I for India, C for China, and S for South Africa. And right now, there are almost 2/3 of this earth, all the nations on this earth, 2/3 of them have joined Brics. You may know about it, but unfortunately the rest of the country does not. Very few people do. But I can truly tell you, the United States has helped other nations in the past, and they in turn have asked us to join with them, but it's been deliberately kept. But I can tell you, once people know about it and demand, and I'm asking that all of you demand that we join Brics, a lot of the things that were talked about here will definitely be resolved.
All right. Thank you.
Hello, Dave Hoffman with LaRouche PAC. We got to get the United States out of the business of continual regime change and endless wars and into the business of creating these big, massive, high-paying infrastructure jobs will increase the standard of living for everybody. And a sure way to do that is to join the Brics: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They had their summit in July in Brazil. They created a new economic system, a new bank for development, and there's huge infrastructure projects going on already all over the world. For instance, just to name a few, in Nicaragua, the Chinese are building a new canal bigger than the Panama Canal. They're going to build a transcontinental railroad across South America. They're building one across Mexico and Africa, and of course the new Silk Road in China and into Central Asia and into Europe. So we got to get the United States joining this economic system to replace the IMF and the World Bank. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Thank you. I think the initiative should be clear that any form of economy, particularly in development, 2 of my colleagues, I think, spoke on Brics, but I wanted to again emphasize that you will not have any type of movement in type of what Narendra Modi called for development if you do not get the essence of your role in this government that is not just for your local area, but of all local areas, which means the whole country of the United States and every part of the world. Now, we have been circulating petitions to join with the Brics, to join with these countries. We do not want world war, and like I said, all your efforts would be useless when whatever it is you're trying to do here. We do have a conference event December 20th, and we want to invite all of you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Happy holidays.